to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kelly, would you call the roll?
Michael DeVito.
Here.
James Shiloh.
Here.
Christian Cockrell. Beth Marie Evans.
Here.
Alex Grados.
Here.
Eric Jones.
Present.
Alan Santu.
Present.
The quorum is present.
Good evening. As a reminder, our board governs by policy, which is aligned with state statute. It's essential that our practices reflect these policies, ensuring transparency, accountability, and effective governance. Only in a duly convened public meeting with the quorum present can the board govern as a whole. Where our practices and policies do not meet the current needs of the district, it's our responsibility to amend those policies where legally allowable to better serve our community and align with our strategic plan. Our mission is to empower all learners to succeed in their world. Our vision is to provide an ideal learning experience where students and staff are engaged and want to come back the next day. Our board policies and actions should reflect that mission and vision. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as proposed?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Cockrell. Evans.
Yes.
Grados.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Santu.
Yes.
DeVito.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Is there a motion to approve the NIA consent agenda as proposed?
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. Kelly, would you call the roll?
Evans.
Yes.
Grados.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Santu.
Yes.
Shiloh.
Yes.
DeVito.
Yes.
Motion carried.
If you wish to address the board this evening, please raise your hand at this time. When called upon, kindly state your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Please refrain from mentioning specific names during your remarks. And in accordance with the Illinois Open Meetings Act, the board cannot engage in deliberative discussions or take immediate action on items not listed on the agenda. However, we want to assure you that your comments are important to us and will be taken into consideration. Thank you for your understanding. Seeing no comments, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Let's see here. Superintendent reports.
You'll see the building and departmental updates in the board packet. There's an EC5 report from our elementary principals, as well as Neve Welp, who is our early childhood administrator, also the middle school and the high school. Glad to answer any questions that you might have about anything that was in the building and departmental updates. A lot of meat in there. A lot of good stuff going on.
Well, the next item on the agenda, let's see, is board reports. At this time, are there any board reports?
Calendar. Scheduling. Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Still?
Alan?
Yeah, so we just had a superintendent evaluation ad hoc committee meeting. And we wanted to set up a meeting for our next get-together. Do we want to try to set up, I know we didn't have our devices in front of us to set up a calendar time. Is there a particular day that works? Maybe,
Tuesdays are always pretty good for me.
Is doing another 5:30 on Tuesday the 25th of February, is that too tight, you think, Alan, timeline? Because I know you were talking about wanting a little more time.
you know, well, I guess it's for discussion.
I just don't like the 5:30s. It's separate time. I don't know. 5:30 flowing through to 11 can be a little long. I prefer to break it up, but if the consensus is 5:30, I think it could work.
Dare I say it, could we do maybe a Thursday, the 30th? Maybe we have a Tuesday meeting and then
Thursday
the 30th?
The 30th.
Of February?
30th of what?
Or I suppose there's nothing stopping us from doing something sooner.
Well, there is no.
I was looking at February.
27th.
Am I looking at this one? February. February 3rd? No,
It's not
I'm
a
sorry.
thing.
I'm looking January. I have it. Yeah, I'm tracking it wrong. Sorry, the 27th. You know, 30 days in February.
How about the 18th? Tuesday the 18th?
Tuesday the 18th.
Tuesday the 11th, there's a special policy committee meeting at 5 p.m. wouldn't be,
Do you expect that to be a long meeting?
no, not really, just 117, right? No, not really, maybe an hour.
Okay, we could do 6 or 7 o'clock on the 11th.
I won't personally be able to make that, I'm gonna be gone that day, but
Well, if we're
that
doing,
won't stop you guys from,
if we're doing that time again, we should just do 5 or 5:30 on the 25th, unless the whole thing is we need more time. Maybe could
I think
push
if we,
this up?
because we're gonna do, the way we talked about proceeding forward, probably do it next week. If we're just gonna be reviewing the drafts that we put together, I think we could do it in an hour and a half, right?
And that would be before our next board meeting.
Immediately before.
Like today.
Just today.
Correct.
Yeah, that's right.
That sounds good to me. I mean, I can try to work around anything else if it's.
yeah, if the 11th is better for you guys, don't use my schedule as the basis, but yeah, I'm around on the 25th, so we can do that.
I prefer the 25th. We do that?
Sure.
Great. 5:30?
Alright. On the calendar. Any other board reports?
You take a non-committee board
Yeah,
reports as well?
any,
SEF met last night. I would say a rather normal meeting. We have grant night scheduled for late February, so that's coming up on the docket. And then I guess just a couple things for SEF this weekend is Final Fest at PHA's, if anybody's heard of that. So you can come out, enjoy some live music. And SEF will have a table there and to donate as part of the overall fest. Trivia night is the 28th of February. The 28th does exist in February.
It's before the 30th.
It's before the 30th. It's a couple days before the 30th. That's the joke right there. So if you're in for a really fun night, I've attended the past couple of years. It's a cool event. It's normally packed. It comes close to selling out. So get your tickets. So that's coming up as well.
Those just online, you can get those? I see
Yeah,
this
you can-
website.
yeah.
Do you need a whole table, or is it just, you guys do individual
You
seats?
don't, but you can. I mean, like, I think getting a table is encouraged. Having a group.
Just need to find 6 friends.
Sure. The more the merrier.
While we're at it, the Music Boosters, a note to remember is a week from Saturday. Saturday night.
Anything else? No? Okey-doke, no old business. We're chugging through this agenda. All right, new business. First item on the agenda, approval of the Sycamore Education Support Staff Association Memorandum of Understanding. So just before we introduce a motion on this, Steve, would you mind just giving us a little context?
I put a little context up here. Nick was really involved in the work on this, so I'll kind of zip through these bullets, and then Nick, if you've got anything to add, feel free to jump in. Just as some background context, this time last year, we were in the midst of adding about 45 new members to SESA. They petitioned in the fall, winter of 23, and about this time last year, we were in the midst of adding those members to SESA. So that work was done in 2024. Part of that inclusion of that new group was a little challenging because the staff members come from kind of different working groups. Some are part-time, some are full-time, some are 9 months, some are 12 months. So trying to find a way to fit all those things together was a little challenging, but Nick worked with SESA leadership. Our attorney was involved, IEA representatives were involved. We worked through that, but last spring there was an unforeseen issue that revolved around sick and vacation days. So it came up last spring, there was some conversation about it, and we've reached a memorandum of understanding with SESA that we're asking the board to approve tonight. you want to add anything additional there?
Yeah, essentially, like the last time we negotiated with them, we had included a sick day bonus as an incentive just to be at work and not miss kind of attendance. That was when everyone had the same position, everyone had the same calendar. But as Steve said, when we added that group, we went from everyone at 179 days to some with 184, some with 207, some with 209, some with 220, and then some with 260. So some that have vacation days, some that don't. So that sick day bonus, to make it equitable, we had to address the fact that not everyone works the same amount of days. Some of them have vacation, some don't, and this MOU addresses all of that, and we think makes it equitable for all those different groups.
So the district and SESA have come to agreement, it's just the board needs to approve it.
Yeah.
But it's not an ongoing, it's been resolved.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yep.
So then just to get into the deliberative piece, is there a motion to approve the Sycamore Education Support Staff Association Memorandum of Understanding?
So moved.
Second that.
And second, any discussion?
I think it's great. I think it's great they're gonna get an extra bonus, especially if they're on a 9-month position. That's difficult.
Any other comments? Seeing no further comments, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, stands approved. Move on to the next item on the agenda, Parent-Teacher Advisory Committee. And again, before a motion or any action for that matter is introduced on this, Steve, if you wouldn't mind, a little
Sure.
context?
Sure. Yeah, so board policy 2150 stipulates committees that the board should have or can have, including ad hoc committees like the superintendent evaluation committee. One of the committees that it stipulates is Parent-Teacher Advisory Committee, and for many years the board has delegated the responsibilities of that committee to the administration. You can see, I took it right out of policy 2150, that third bullet point in quotes. I'm not going to read through that, I'll let you read through that. Essentially has to do with developing policies regarding student behavior. Recent legal guidance has recommended that the board begin convening that committee as a board committee. So this is a little bit of a change in process. In addition to the Parent-Teacher Advisory Committee, one of the other committees that the board can convene is also the behavioral, I want to make sure I get this right, the Behavioral Interventions Committee. That committee has to do with student behavior when it comes to students with disability. Legal guidance, recent legal guidance indicated that the work of that committee, which is also quoted in the second bullet point there, can be wrapped up into the work that the Parent-Teacher Advisory Committee does. So essentially, we've had some conversation, Michael and I, and the board has had some conversation about PTAC. This is going to be something new. It's a board committee, so administration is happy to be involved, and I've had some conversation with the administration within the district. So we've got representatives from high school, middle school, elementary, and EC that are kind of ready to kind of get involved as this rolls out. Typically, a district committee would be facilitated by myself or one of the members of the administration. This is a board committee, so much like the policy committee, it's really facilitated by board members. PTAC includes board members, parents, teachers, and members of the administration. So we're also happy to help reach out to parents or members of the teaching staff to get them involved as well. So just a little context to that. But really, this is a committee that the board facilitates, so we're happy to help, but probably a good time to have, for the board to have some discussion about what that might look like, timeline, things like that.
So, without introducing a motion on this, because I don't know that there really is a good motion, but to get things into motion, I wanted to just have like a discussion more or less about what our board's expectations are for this statutorily required committee. So we're legally obligated to the committee. There are some expectations that the state statute puts out for us. Steve's done a nice job of giving us a real high-level overview. There's an opportunity for the board to decide to wrap behavioral interventions into PTAC, and state statute allows us to do that. Everyone on the board has gotten the legal guidance, a lot of information. The third opinion of legal guidance outlines like almost 2 pages on PTAC, so there's just like a lot to digest there. I have a fairly mediocre working understanding of what it could look like, but I wanted to first just discuss this as a group. So anyone here have any comments about the idea, we'll say first, of combining behavioral intervention with PTAC instead of having 2 standalone committees? We feel like that's an okay thing to do. Any strong resistance to that?
I think we should do that.
So do I, yes.
Okay. General consensus, fewer committees, okay. So that's, all right, so then the second piece is acknowledging its membership and who would be appointed or who would sit on this. So parents, teachers, administration, given the working knowledge that they would bring to the table related to these issues. I think a really big opportunity that we have with PTAC is to meet stakeholders closer to where they can affect change. So barred from just coming to one of these meetings, talking in public comment, saying I don't like X, Y, or Z, bringing in people on these committees, regardless of if they're required by the state or not, is I think a great idea. So in terms of how the board appoints these people, parents, teachers, and principals to this board committee, do you guys have a preference, or are you okay with me as the president just picking these people? I personally would feel more comfortable if the board gave me a little more guidance on what groups they think should be represented. And I don't expect you guys to answer now, but I think it would be a really good opportunity to like sit and think on it, and then maybe we can come back to this at the end of February with what that number looks like. Maybe there's 6 people on this, and maybe there's 1 from each school, or maybe you feel strongly about 1 EC5, 1 middle school, but composition of this committee is its own category. Any stream of conscious thoughts on composition?
It would be helpful, at least for me, to make any sort of recommendation based on what other districts, what does Canaan do with PTAC, what does Genoa do with PTAC, how many community members are on it, what type of community members, are they all parents? I would assume since it's called the Parent Teacher Advisory Committee, they would all be parents, but could we have people in the community who are not parents on the PTAC? And then the biggest thing for me would be, how do we inform those constituents that this committee exists? I mean, we talked extensively last week about community engagement. How do we engage the community and let them know that they would have the option to join this? Is the, I think, is going to be a real challenge.
It would be easy to send out a blanket email message to stakeholders. When I convene the CAC committee every fall, that's where it starts. I send an email out with a survey, or bulletin communications helps with that. But a message goes out, just kind of explaining what we're looking for, asking for volunteers, all those names, information gets put together in a list. And then I start sifting through that list. I work with the administrators to kind of help pick names. I approach that pretty methodically, so I want representation from as far across the district as I can get. Not only the geographic part of the district, but also every level. So you see 5 middle school, high school. So that's kind of how I build that. So getting the message out to the community, I think there's a medium to do that. If the board wants to seek volunteers that way, we can do that. If you just want to get the message out about PTAC, we can do that as well. But I think because I know I've gotten a pretty good response from that CAC survey, I think that's a pretty worthwhile way to do that.
So with the CAC survey, did you get all the volunteers so all the positions were filled, I guess, through that?
The first year was about 120
okay.
parents that were interested. It's come down to about 40, 45. And I only look for 6. So the way it was set up was that there's 12 total, and it's 2-year terms. And I try to rotate that so 6 people are on, rolling off, and new ones coming on every year, so that there's consistency in the work that we're doing. So, yeah, pretty good number.
I would think something similar to that in size for the P-TECH would make sense, 12 total. Parent, you're talking that's just the parent portion of it, the community part of it?
Yeah, we could send out a survey, we could send out to stakeholders, so looking for parent involvement. We could also send a similar survey out to the teachers, soliciting involvement from teachers as well. And then once you have that list of people who are interested, then you can kind of sift through that and kind of start making selections. Yeah.
These would be open meetings that others could attend if they wanted to, they just might not be participants as far as the committee goes.
So since this in policy is a standing board committee, it would be subject to Open Meetings Act. And then my hope would be that we would have a board member appointed as like a chair, co-chair type situation, 2 board members be on that committee. And then from there, they would facilitate the work of that committee and the mission of that committee. So,
And since it's an advisory committee, might be helpful for you to, what is the output, what do the outputs feed into, and how are they used?
2 pieces. So PTAC feeds into student discipline policies and implementation of those policies and other factors related to the safety of their schools, students, and school personnel. So that's the Parent-Teacher Advisory Council's primary focus. Behavioral intervention is supposed to develop and monitor procedures for using behavioral interventions. And so basically, I shouldn't say basically because it's anything but that. There's actually a long string of specific related code requirements for the development of guidance with students with disabilities. So that's Behavioral Interventions Committee. And again, I think a big part of this is it's really district is going to run those through these advisory committees for input, and then that committee is going to produce an opinion on it. That's effectively what will happen. So the idea is this is another way to solicit stakeholder input. And again, this is just like the Illinois state statute has created these committees to exist to allow stakeholder input in a formal manner for these items.
So this would kind of,
Yeah.
this would kind of feed a suggestion from the committee for the administrative policy or for the board policy?
So, and this is again kind of another like hairy question, but like the really specific instance of action that comes from this is the student handbook. Our policy stipulates an annual approval of the handbook, while state statute doesn't obligate us to that. So there may be an opportunity for us to look at that policy again and determine if we do want to amend that or not. But again, the way our policy spells out is it stipulates that after the PTAC, Parent Teacher Advisory, has made a recommendation on the handbook, i.e. discipline procedures and parent involvement in the schools, the board would annually approve that 2 weeks or 15 days, it's really specific, prior to the start of school year.
But the behavior piece shows up more on the board policy side, doesn't it?
So the behavioral piece is really detailed, and that's why I'm a little timid to rattle off the 6 sections that it basically addresses. But at a high level, the Behavioral Intervention Committee is just going to be reviewing procedures in place for how students with disabilities are handled. Again, a lot of this is how is the school handling behavior of students. And behavioral interventions is more or less related to students with disabilities, whereas parent-teacher advisory is more about like discipline and reward and parental involvement, which is why they say that PTAC and behavioral intervention could be one committee.
Well, my question though, and I think this feeds down with the question, is if the output of the Behavioral Intervention Committee is a policy recommendation, then that would go to the policy committee and not really involve any development on the handbook side. So is that an appropriate place for it, or is it more appropriate for that to be convened somehow with the policy committee?
So there is no policy output from behavioral intervention. Behavioral intervention is just a checkpoint. So like what's technically obligated is that, and like this is again, I'm going to read legal speak here, but the school code doesn't specify that behavioral intervention procedures be reviewed annually by the board. However, because of the overlap with more general student contact and discipline rules, having the PTAC review the functions of Behavioral Intervention Committee can streamline the process of developing and maintaining such procedures compared to having separate committees. So in theory, what could happen is the already existing procedures that are in place for students with disabilities would be reviewed at the same time as just the regular discipline procedures would be reviewed, and the PTAC / behavioral intervention would just merely give it a endorsement of good faith or not. As it relates to behavior intervention, regardless of if the PTAC or behavioral intervention support it or not, the district is under no obligation to follow that recommendation. Does that make sense? I know it's a lot to follow.
Yeah, I was just looking at their linked document, the ISB document on behavioral intervention. It just talks a lot about policy development, not so much administrative procedure or handbook. That this is all specifically like what was in the board policy. And so that's why my question was, if this is going to have to, this committee is then going to have to interface with the policy committee if there are suggested changes or anything. Does it make more sense just to have the policy committee take over that responsibility? But I don't know how much the parents or other community members would feed into that. It's just a question.
Are you directing that towards me or just?
To anybody that knows.
Okay. Well, I can tell you just in the confines of where behavioral intervention can get wrapped into, it would need to be a part of PTAC, or it would need to be its standalone. As far as like if its actions refer to policy or not, I think that's to the preference of that advisory committee. But I think in best practice, like the PTAC behavioral interventions would lead to policy changes in addition to a handbook. Like at a minimum, it's a handbook endorsement and thumbs up at a board meeting saying, hey, we think that the current behavioral policies are looking good. At its most aggressive point, it would be referring to policy for changes and revisions. So yeah, you're not wrong, Eric.
Would this also allow parents or teachers who are on the committee to point out how a intervention isn't working and then look for a change, or are we at liberty to make changes based on the input we get?
It's really like, and I think I'm answering your question right, this is generically, like broad sweeping. So you wouldn't want a parent coming to that committee with a specific instance.
Mm-hmm.
It would be more or less, hey, there's a problem with the way this process works, and we want an outlet to change that process.
Okay.
And I'm just going to throw in a lot of student discipline policies, behavior intervention policies. They get very formal when it comes to the law, the school code. So the nice part is that our leadership team has done a great job over the years vetting all of that, keeping up to date with changes in law. SB 100 is a good example. All of those got incorporated into the student handbook. So I'll go back to what Michael said a little bit ago. You know, our hope is that this committee might have some recommendations in terms of, hey, could you look into this? This intervention doesn't seem to be as effective. But I'll throw in that there's a lot of ties to law and code that we're required to follow, and in some cases, limitations that we have. The behavioral interventions that we implement, I would say, are even more stringent, you know, when it comes to law and what's required, what's not allowed. So I think that what the administrators can bring to those committees is kind of the knowledge of, hey, we're the legal, you know, kind of guidelines here, the guardrails. But what's really helpful, you know, from both teachers and parents is, hey, could you look into this? We like how this policy is working. Could we look into this a little bit more? That can be referred then to the administration. We can work with our attorneys. And in specific, Robin Schwartz, our attorneys, they provide great guidance. They have specialists in general student discipline policies, and then they've got also great guidance when it comes to behavioral interventions with students with disabilities. So I think we've got a great legal team that can help us as well, but what would be really valuable for us as we're finalizing the handbook, you know, this spring is just input from this committee in terms of what they like and what they might like to see us work on in the future.
Michael, I don't know if this will need to change or if it can feed into, the high school specifically does this every single year with a small committee. They do a handbook review, teachers are involved, students are involved. I believe they bring parents in on it. So they go through some of their handbook policies and what could be tweaked based on all that input. So I don't know if that could be a first step that then goes to that committee or if that just needs to maybe dissolve, but just something to know.
Yeah, no, that's, I think, and again, I would, sorry.
It sounds like that would be the work of this committee
For one school though.
for one school, but we would do this.
Yeah, and I think that I really trust the admin to look at this and tell the board, hey, if there's an opportunity for overlap, or like you think, hey, those people could blend into, just, there's a fine line between like where this board sits on wanting to check a box and wanting to go above and beyond. And so, like, I'll read like the school code section on behavioral interventions. It's, requires that it be developed with the advice of parents with students with disabilities and other parents, teachers, administrators, and advocates for persons with disabilities and individuals with knowledge or expertise in the development and implementation of behavioral interventions for persons with disabilities. So it's kind of like you have a committee of people who, none of which have any, let's say it's all parents and none of those parents have students with disabilities. Like, I don't know that we've met that criteria. Now, again, from intention, if we bring behavioral interventions and parent-teacher advisory together as one, we have to be cognizant of the composition of that committee, checking those boxes, or going above and beyond to give those parents an opportunity to represent their students with disabilities. And that's, again, like some of the weight that comes with this. And then to Nick's point, like, you have a really great group of people who have a long-standing practice of doing good work and are well-equipped, know, like, how do we leverage that while still meeting the criteria set by the state? How do we check the boxes but also go above and beyond? And that's, I think, where our discretion comes in who's composing these committees, what frequency they meet, and then if there's overlap with district committees, how are we going to handle that? And this is a big undertaking, so like you're getting teased with this now, not with action, but these questions are bringing to light, I think, the enormity of what this project could be, or the littleness that it could be, this board's will.
Do all of the elementary schools have their own handbook?
So they're similar though. I mean, the meat of it, I would say, is consistent, but then they each put their own little twist on it that's specific to their school.
Every school has its own handbook, and there's a history of involving new staff, parents in the development of that, to review that every year. But I think Derek's point, that's elementary does that for the elementary, middle school does that for middle school, high school does that for high school. So that's how previous boards have been meeting this requirement, is having those separate committees do that work, but there's never been one district level committee that's done that work. Same applies to the Behavioral Interventions Committee. That's something that's handled through our student services department. So because they specialize in overseeing, supporting students with disabilities, they do that work and have met the requirement, not a board committee necessarily, but that requirement is important not only in board policy at the state level, but the federal level as well. So meeting that requirement is important, and we've been doing that work as well, just in a separate district level committee.
And I'll just add, as someone who did that work at the high school when I was in that role, it wasn't just one meeting for an hour. I mean, this was quite a bit of work, so I think maybe just think through, like, is the intent of PTAC to do that work, to really get down, or just to maybe give input based on the work that was already done, and that maybe that other committee gets back and does some work, but it wasn't just one or a couple meetings, it was a lot of work.
Maybe we need to just look into what we need to do to be legally compliant and pick up, I wouldn't want to just forget about all the work that's been done by the staff, I don't know how we can cross over, into another committee when it's done by staff, how can we do that? With the least disruption, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and still be legally compliant. I don't know if we can get advice from the lawyers regarding that, or they were the one that pointed out They're the ones that pointed out we needed to be legally compliant with the committee.
Yes.
Sounds like we may have some options though, and I think, but, I think Celine, maybe there's some discussion, we could, as the board, take on all of that in this advisory committee, or perhaps the advisory committee could be assembled and then delegated out to the mechanisms that exist, and then report out to the tech committee to govern it, so to speak, so that we're compliant, but there might be multiple options to go down. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, and again, like Beth pointed out, I think there's really like, it's like a scale. So on one end, we could say to administration, to Steve, hey, to Nick, you guys have these existing groups. We have this legal requirement. What checks those boxes? Get us where it checks those boxes. Where does the board need to sign off to say this is a board committee, it's open to the public, it's got a board member sitting on it? What's the minimum criteria we need to meet to use what's already in existence? And then from there, and again, that sounds bad because we're saying we're checking boxes, meeting minimum criteria, things like that. But in concept, right, that's like a starting point. And then from there, we can decide, do we want to turn up that knob on how much responsibility we take on? Or are we already feeling like our hands are full with responsibilities and another one is not something we're looking for? And so if this board doesn't have a ton of opinion on it, that's...
Well, I don't feel like, I would like to be on, I'm kind of excited about it. I want to hear what's going on in the schools, and it's a way for me to hear, but I also don't want to come in and take away from people that have been doing something for so long, because they probably feel valued in that position and all the work they've done. So I guess my question would be, how can we combine what's already going on and then be legally compliant?
You're here.
It'd be easy for us to reach out to Matthew and Bill. They were involved in reviewing that policy and kind of ask that question, okay, what's the minimum? What could this look like? If you'd like to do that's fine too. I mean, that's
No, I'm
easy
comfortable having-
first step.
Again, at the will of this is a board committee, but it's a lot, as you see, because it's really the only one it's the only board committee that's required by state law. So to me, I'd feel more comfortable if there is no strong opinion, having the administration come back to us with the recommendation on how we can be legally compliant, but also respect the existing infrastructure, so we make the least possible waves.
Disruptions, yeah, that's what
Right.
I don't want a disruption. I mean, I want to be involved, I don't mind the work, I'm happy to be involved and I want to be involved in it, but I also don't want to take away from people that already know what they're doing anyway, and then they would feel like we're coming in and, kind of negating all the work they've been doing for years or however long they've been in these positions and in these individual committees from the schools. Plus, they already know what's going on in the school, and we're kind of just, we would be dependent on them to give us information, really, the people that have already been doing it.
I think it'd be important to know from legal what level of involvement and how much delegation can be undertaken. I don't want to underestimate the amount of time it would take for the board or a subcommittee of the board to manage 7 different groups of people, 7 different meetings, to come up with 7 different handbooks if there's already a procedure in place to
Right.
do that. The question is just whether that delegation satisfies the requirement that those participants are members of the committee, and whether that's just a board policy issue or a state statute related issue, because our policy says that its members, the committee's members, are parents. So does having them attend and meet with administration to develop this and then make a recommendation, the board satisfy that, or doesn't one or more board members have to be present at every one of those 7 meetings? That's what I would want to know.
We can certainly reach out and ask those questions, yeah.
Because if that's the requirement, then that might dictate a shift in just how that's done, and maybe the elementaries are combined and not necessarily into a unified handbook, but something that is easier to manage from a meeting standpoint.
I think just in the practical approach, it'd be nice to know what practical approach the board has to, if we can if we can represent all of these groups, give all of these people a voice, make accessible their input, and if we can do that in one meeting and without disrupting the existing infrastructure, I think that's a win-win. I don't, it sounds like a great idea, but again, in practice, I don't know the existing infrastructure, so I can't.
Is that a fair question to ask, is if we could report back how each school is doing it, maybe the composition or what it looks like, just so we have an understanding, which we probably will need to give to get that legal guideline anyway, but it might be helpful for us just to understand. It doesn't sound like it's broke, we don't have an issue, other than, we're working within the compliance section, but we're doing the process, and seemingly okay with it. We just need to have the oversight to but
PTAC.
PTAC, thank you. So it might be helpful just to understand what that process looks like today. Not in great detail, but just the team is composed of these members, or from these, there's 3 teachers, there's 3, however you said.
I'd go a step further and say if we could couple that with the recommendation.
Sure.
Then it's just, you know what I mean, then we've got it all and go on.
I think a proposal on how this committee would meet, how frequently they'd meet, what they would discuss from administration as a baseline recommendation would be very helpful. And then we could tweak that instead of coming up with every single, instead of trying to come up with that as a group of 7 together, get their guidance on what they think would be the least disruptive, what would be the most effective, and then we can tweak it from there. I think just, so I don't know, Michael, do you want a motion to direct
No, and
administration
I mean,
to?
the only reason it's like this, we're still deliberating this, and I'm still just making sure everyone's on the same page, is because it's a board committee, we're delegating some board work. We're asking admin to essentially produce a recommendation on what will eventually be board work. So if you guys are comfortable with that, I'm comfortable with that. It sounds like, Alex, that's where you're at, and I'm getting that from you too, Alan.
Yeah, the
That's
only
shaking your
other thing I
head.
might add is if there was any feedback of maybe XYZ school has an overwhelming amount of interest, or we have a hard time getting students, or not students, I'm sorry, parents that are interested, or are all the schools happy with the process, or do certain areas need to be improved? Because then it gives us some guidance of where we stand today versus where maybe we want to go, and are we okay with the kind of the oversight role, or does it need to be something more? I'm not sure that it does, but it'd be good for us to understand.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it'd be helpful when we hear back from the lawyers, or Steve can find that information out, where we need to be, and then formulate a plan, like you were saying.
And I think we know where we need to be. I think it's just where we are, where we need to be relative to what we already have, I think is the
Oh,
gap.
okay. Then
They-
maybe we could find out where we would be helpful at in helping the separate committees that are in the administration that are already working on these things. What could we do to help, maybe take some of the weight off of them if they're doing that in addition to their regular job they do every day. So,
So then, is there a motion to refer this to administration for recommendation?
so
And-
move.
Well, and I guess more or less just soliciting a motion.
Soliciting,
Do we want
okay.
to put a time piece on it, or do we want to leave it open-ended?
Reasonable, or is that not enough time?
February board meeting, 25th? Yeah, that's reasonable.
I think we're going to need to, because if the findings come back that we have to orchestrate all of this over the next 4 months, with that kind of, starting the process more or less from scratch, we're going to need time. These are 70-page documents, they're not
Yeah, they're not.
trivial.
The other
No,
thing,
we're-
the other thing I'll throw in is that 2 years ago, we subscribed to the IPA model student handbook. So like Press recommends updates to board policy. The IPA, the Illinois Principals Association, several years ago put together a model student handbook. And when they did that, now they have a product to sell, so they've been selling that. But very much like Press, it's updated annually based on changes to school code, statute, you name it. So a lot of that work is done and gets updated automatically every year. So a lot of that work is done. But, yeah, at the latest by February 25th, we can have some feedback from the board. If we get that done sooner, I can send it to the board in email, written format.
You guys want to see this on another agenda?
Presentation of that recommendation, or I guess proposal as to how it would work would be warranted, so we can provide feedback on it.
James, you seem like you're okay with this?
Yes.
Does it seem-
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure, for sure.
All right,
It
sounds
seems
good.
like a great mechanism to get all stakeholders involved, right? And that's probably why it has this legal compliance requirement, that the board, certainly knowing what's going on, that the community can provide their feedback on what is or isn't working, or what they'd like to see. You've got the experts that can help guide both board and community on what is working, what doesn't work, how we can change it within the confines of what's legally possible. So it makes a lot of sense, but I think we need to help figure out how to move forward.
Yeah, huge opportunity. It really is. I think it's exciting, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so then is there a motion to, I guess, receive additional reporting on the February 25th agenda regarding PTAC?
So moved.
Seconded.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
The last item on the agenda for executive session is the approval of educational norms first reading. Again, another one of those where it's sitting on new business. I'll give it just a super brief preamble. I don't expect us to approve this tonight, despite the language. I think a first reading would be appropriate, and it's in draft form. Eric, do you want to touch on a little bit more about what this looks like, or is, or could be in theory?
Sure, yeah, we've talked about this at previous board meetings, and I know when I first came on the board, it seemed like there were a bunch of unwritten rules just about how the board conducts itself, how you interact with the public, who handles questions from the media, how do you ask a question of the superintendent, how do we communicate surveys in a compliant way with OMA, stuff like that. And so there are a lot of boards, and it was one of the recommendations at the III conference that a board norms document exists. That's a resource for board members to go to look up these questions about how it is that we're going to do all these things, both from a procedural standpoint as well as just what do we commonly believe and hold ourselves to from an expectation standpoint. So Michael and I did review probably a half dozen examples that are out there, and they all follow fairly similar structures and wording, so I don't think that there's anything on here that's too Sycamore specific, other than just calling out specific people and our timeline regarding meetings. But you'll notice it's broken into those two parts. The first is the norms, which are kind of like what we believe sort of statements. They don't necessarily tell you how, but they tell you why we do the things that we do. And then the second section is protocols, which is more now digging into the how. If you want a question asked to the superintendent, how do you get a hold of him or her? If you want to address a parent concern, how do you do that? What are the steps you undertake? Committee reports, interactions with the media, posting on social media, all that stuff is kind of broken out in here. And so I guess Michael and I are just looking for you guys to look that over if you feel like there's anything that hasn't been addressed that we should add in here, so it's clear for the current and future boards. We'd be happy to do that. If there's anything in here where you have a question about the process that's been laid out that could be improved or changed, we're looking for feedback on that as well.
I have one thing I'd like to add. Obtaining information about board meeting agenda items part of the meeting. I think adding something where if the items aren't placed on the board portal by the Thursday preceding a Tuesday meeting, then that agenda item should just be removed from the agenda, because these attachments being added the day of the meeting, or I feel, or a couple days before, over the weekend, don't give sufficient time to adequately prepare. So that's just something I would like to add if the board so chooses, is comfortable with that.
Which item were you looking at?
So protocols, subsection 2. So just another sentence.
Oh, okay. All right. So
If it's not in there by Thursday, we just
So materials
talking
should
about
be
next
placed
time.
on the board online portal by Thursday preceding a Tuesday meeting.
All right, this does not have, we had updated some of this text, and then we put 2 Thursdays prior in the draft, the last draft we were working on. And part of this, this part is, I would say, open for discussion. I know when we talked 8 months ago or a year ago about going down to 1 meeting a month, the idea was that that would give more administration more time to get the agenda laid out and to get those materials presented for the agenda. I don't know that we've always met that requirement, so we're looking to strike some balance, and your point is spot on for why we're trying to find that balance, the materials up there with enough time to be looked through so that we don't feel like we're coming to a Tuesday meeting and not able to appropriately address an item that's been added to the agenda. I don't know that I'm in support of necessarily something just being struck, because there may be some other legal or other reason why that item has to quickly get put on the agenda, and the requirement of not being able to get the materials on there forcing us to perhaps break compliance. I could come up with an exception, I'm sure, as to why.
Yeah, I think compliance
should be
would
allowed.
supersede a protocol or a norm, but I see where you're coming from here. I guess I just feel strongly that if we have this in there, that they're placed on the Thursday proceeding, that we stick with that.
Or even go, well, and we were talking about the 2 Thursdays
Okay,
before,
2 Thursday, well, that's.
which is ambitious, I
Yeah, that
think.
sounds-
And we were talking, and Steve, remember right, we thought it could be reasonable. There's some work on our end too that, you know, we have to be cognizant of, like the draft period from an agenda being, I guess, more advanced. So if you had like a stream of conscious thought a week before, it's gonna have to wait a month.
So when I got here, it was, agenda and packet went out the Friday before, and after some meetings and in time, there was a desire for the packet and the agenda to be released to the board a week before. We still release it publicly on the Friday before. But in order for us to do that, you know, we sent a draft agenda out to the board president. That was Jen, now it's Michael. You know, we send that out 2 weeks in advance, kind of gather feedback, and then as soon as that agenda is finalized, we start putting everything together. So getting everything out to the board 2 Thursdays in advance would not push that back, you know, to 2.5 weeks. And that is ambitious. It would add clarity. But in that 2.5 weeks between that first initial draft agenda going out to the board president and the board meeting, sometimes things happen that need to be on the agenda. So then you run that risk of, okay, are we gonna get it out 2.5 weeks in advance, get it approved, have everything ready for the board? Hope that something came up and it really does need to be on the board agenda. And the legal requirement is 48 hours before the meeting. So sometimes it's advantageous. You've got something that comes up, it is last minute, but it's advantageous to get it on the agenda, get it in front of the board for consideration and hopefully approval, to be able to move forward with whatever. A lot of times it's hiring, especially over the summer, right? So, just kind of think backwards as you're considering this protocol, getting it out to the board, getting the agenda and the complete packet out to the board a week in advance. You know, we don't start building the packet till the agenda's approved, obviously, because we don't know exactly what's on there. So that in and of itself has kind of backed everything in 2 weeks, you know, from the initial draft agenda that Kelly sends out to feedback, approval of the draft agenda, and starting to get it back together. There are some things that are routine that we know that go in the packet. Some things are specific, you know, the PTAC, that information like that is unique to that agenda. So just know, you know, I think it's a great idea to have as much clarity and time to look through things as you possibly can. But I would encourage the board to kind of consider, okay, what's the balance? You know, how much time do you need it, and then how much time in advance will we need feedback and time to get everything together in advance, and what could happen in that window of time between?
I'm comfortable with the Thursday. That was, I didn't mean anything. I just want to stick with it, you know, if we go with Thursday before, 2 Thursdays before, it's the whole packet, not the agenda, but then some items pop up later. That just has been created, for me, that's been creating confusion. So I'd like to, if we go with with this, would that shy away from the practice of we have our agenda, but then we add some attachments later, like we got some yesterday? Does this mean, or is our thinking here, Thursday, it's all done, every attachment's in it, we're good to go?
I think the only thing that I would say that we wait till kind of the last minute is board bills to make sure that we get as many bills into the agenda as possible so that the board can approve them and we can move forward on. So that's
Okay.
typically Thursday, Friday, right? That's typically not ready.
Thanks.
And they're legally compliant with 48 hours, so
Yeah.
already they're giving us everything early
Mhm.
for the most part. And maybe you could make a stipulation on what it is. If it's something that takes a lot of time to look through, maybe we could put it off to another month. But like Steve was saying, what if it's something important we need to address? We don't want to wait another month. Or maybe we'd have to have a special meeting for that. But I don't even know if we can do that within the law. Special meetings are kind of different than regular board meetings, so then we'd run into that problem. So, I don't know.
The issue that's, James, yes.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I know you can't write it to just say do your best, but like, there have been situations, and I can't think of exactly a scenario, but like, we're waiting on a third party's presentation,
Mhm.
and that third party's coming in to present on a Tuesday, and you guys have put it in on like a Friday. Like, are we just gonna say, well, that third party can't come in, we'll see you next month? Like,
Right.
I don't think we can be that cut and dry. I would love it to be that way. I would love like a finality to it, because yeah, there's always that, well, now let me go in and take a look at this in the last second, but I just, like, realistically, what is the answer there? Like, so you didn't get the presentation, you couldn't put it in there, you got it on Friday, we're plenty good to go for Tuesday. Are we just saying no to that person then? And then we're pushing back, and now that's another thing on the agenda the next month, which is supposed to be filled, and then, so on and so forth. It just it's hard for this to be like a cut and dry thing.
Yeah,
It's a
well,
lot
I-
that's out of your control.
Sure, the protocols, like any other policy, are meant to address the things that are common, and there's gonna be some uncommon things
Sure.
that could fall in there. I would just stress, for anybody who's read policies and procedures, the wording is always usually carefully chosen, so for instance, that section uses the word should, right? It's not must, it's not will, it's should, which means best.
Sure.
So in other words, it's best practice. The protocols are best practice, not written in stone.
But it sounds like if the board is fine with the Thursday precedent that had kind of been there before, we can just leave it at the Thursday preceding a Tuesday meeting, and we can work on having the agenda 2 weeks in advance like it was.
Well, financials need to be done on Friday, though, if we just make it Friday. Whatever the last item is to be made, the last time that item can be made, I guess, would be the cutoff.
I think
Seems
a
like-
Friday inclusion, so Thursday seems reasonable, if it's a should. And that way it at least builds some degree of expectancy for people who are coming in.
But I'd almost rather put Saturday, because I don't want somebody to be logging in at 8 AM Friday saying it's not here yet, but 5 PM Friday it
Yeah,
is.
so then Saturday seems, I don't know, it's just a guideline, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
so.
The board always has the option if something gets.
Or close of business Friday.
6:50 on Tuesday, and that isn't something that's urgent, we can always say, well, we haven't had a chance to review the table until the next meeting, if there were those, obviously the. intention-
Probably up on the screen, where I can see it better than on here.
So there are
I
options.
think it's not that serious.
So close of business Friday, Nicole would match with the uploading of the financial report data.
Really depends on the month, this month, we got it done early. It just depends if we're cutting down numbers or anything, but, it's usually a Thursday or Friday.
So realistically, but close of business Friday should really cover
Oh.
99%. And
Yeah.
then
It's
you
just-
know if you're logging in
yeah,
Friday night,
that's
you can
fine.
review it
It's just-
Saturday, Sunday.
I don't like stuff on Monday, that's not enough time. That's fine.
So board agenda and pack it out to the board and the community on Friday?
Do you guys want to see a draft in advance? You've been seeing a draft in advance, so you've had an opportunity, like if you saw something omitted, you've had 4-day lead time to
Yeah.
change it. Do you guys like that?
The draft when it's available, and then everything by Friday. the entire packet by Friday.
And then the public will go out.
Exactly, that
Right.
time.
Okay.
That's what I meant to say. I think you said it much more succinctly.
Say that one more time, I just want to make sure that I,
So-
maybe a draft, or the agenda out the Tuesday before in the packet, the Friday?
Yep, I think that sounds consistent with what you guys are looking for, right? It sounds.
Yes.
Then you have between Tuesday and Friday to change something on the agenda, so.
And the intent of going from Thursday to Friday is to hopefully minimize any additions.
Yeah.
At one time. With minutes.
Selfishly, I'm just wondering, do we still have the ability to add on Monday or Tuesday in my area personnel? It's not a big thing, it would just be a recommendation, a hire.
I'm fine with that.
How often, I don't think that's a frequent,
It's not a frequent thing, but
I mean, I don't think we'd
More
say,
frequent
no,
during
we're not
hiring
gonna hire that
season. I
person.
mean,
You found
you got
Monday,
someone
too
that
bad.
needs to know
Like-
they have a contract before they
Yeah.
leave their other job. And
Again,
if we
and
wait
that-
a month, they're probably not gonna
I
stay
think
with
it's
us.
more like, it's just trying to avoid those 20-page PDF presentations. Where it's
Sure.
like, okay, well, now I don't have time to ask a few
Yeah.
clarifying questions, and that presenter can't be here, and so now I gotta wait a whole month.
There's probably a reason why we don't have norms in our handbook right now. So, because I see we're in the weeds, but at least I would just stress too that this would be a handbook inclusion, not policy. And like, something another board member who's not here said was found bound by the will, like, we will share individual, we will hear all opinions. And so bringing that feedback here, because it can't be present, I think there's some appetite to make these guidelines, norms, not binding though. So I think if anything, the language used should be as soft as possible.
Right, especially if they don't have to have it out legally before 48 hours.
And the problem this solves, which I think is like the main point here, is as a board member, if you're going, how should I interact with my fellow board member, an admin, a member of the public? There's a reference document that gives me a sort of how-to, but never is it Loctite, that's what you need to do, it's what you should do. So,
Michael, is this standalone, or does it go into the handbook? Or?
this would go in the handbook, this would be there's actually a section in the handbook called board norms, and it says, the board has norms, speak with like board president to discuss it. Okay, probably should adjust that.
I did want to make a note too, I really appreciate that when those changes do come up, when Kelly sends out the update, she
Yeah.
states where it is, because it's really helpful to understand, well, this is the only change I need to worry about, I don't need to go try and find it, so that's been really helpful.
So other than those pieces, everything else looks fairly decent. Are we okay if we maybe change a little bit of the wills to shoulds, maybe tweak some of the language to be a little less binding? Is that,
That'd be good. I thought it looked nice. I liked
Just a different,
it. It was a lot of, I think like basic
is it answer
respectful
questions?
behavior.
'Cause
I liked it, no,
I
it
think it
was
would
good.
answer questions for coming board members, for incoming board members.
Mhm.
I think it would be, is that the intent for this?
Yeah, I mean, and I gotta tell you, for my own sanity too, I think to myself, you have a member of the public who comes to you and has interest in X, Y, or Z item, it'd be nice to feel some defensibility to the way you interact with that member by saying, hey, like, this is what I'm doing, and I'm doing it because it's in our handbook that we do X. Not that you would do that, but you'd at least feel like you have something backing your practice, so. There's consistency, we're writing down, we're taking precedent, we're writing it down, we're making it appropriate. So,
I'm not a huge fan of changing the wills on the norms page.
Right, we will respect each other's roles and responsibilities, that's what people should do
We
anyway.
will commit to
A lot of
transparency,
it
we
is-
will, I mean,
Yeah.
We
those
should-
don't seem like things that we
yeah.
should really be like, we should do that.
Yeah, you don't really have to be respectful, you can. I don't
Sure,
know.
again,
To me,
yeah.
a lot of it on the first page is like, I would think
I mean,
we would act like that.
Well, the point they made at the III conference was that if you had an instance where a board member was clearly doing something that maybe wasn't illegal, but was definitely running against all good precedent, you really have no means of stopping that.
Correct.
Right, because the only disciplinary measure that's really available that would, quote, stop that would be the ROE, removing that board member, which basically has happened like twice in history in all of the state of Illinois, and is basically impossible to get done. But this lays out, especially the will statements, I think, say, these are the things that are expected and you've committed to by being on the board. And if you don't follow those things, then it does at least allow the rest of the board to go through some, and I guess that's what we haven't included in here, are some measures of, public, or, reprimand or censure sorts of events that you could escalate to. So there'd be an order of escalation if a board member was consistently, lying on social media about what's going on in meetings or something, I'm trying to come up with something. So that's where I like the will, because it's not, if it's wishy-washy, then I feel like you've lost all accountability on trying to uphold these things.
So Ben, to your point, is there a second? Will there be will there be then consequence to this in your ideal protocol?
Yeah, I kind of forgot that was a recommendation as well, so.
Well, how can you enforce that? Is there any legal, or is it just like a
It's
public
basi-
shaming, basically?
It's
If a
basically,
board member
it's
is,
basically public shaming.
not behaving?
But it gives you the protocol so that nobody's feels like picked on
I see.
arbitrarily, that okay, if you're, like, for instance, there's nothing that prevents you from removing a board member who for 4 years refuses to show up to any meeting. Just as an example that was provided in the comments. So what are you as a board left to do in that
But I guess we could
situation?
even add the ability to petition to the ROE as one of the potential.
Could be, yeah. So that would at least I guess, extra
That's our
document, which
only
isn't
choice.
included here, would be
Yeah.
what are those steps that the
Yeah.
board would follow in the instance that there is a board member who's,
You want some progressive steps.
Right, yeah, progressive, yeah. So that's something we could work on afterward, but this doesn't have to be dependent on that being in place.
So in its current form, it's good, and is there appetite to work on will consequence later, or no?
Probably should, yeah. That's one of the, if they brought that up at the conference, and that was the reason for having the protocol. Or the, norms, and this is,
Alan, you look like you've got something.
No, the only part that I'll bring up is in addressing concerns during public comment at board meetings. Sometimes when people come up and make a statement, it feels a little, our response is a little sterile. It would be nice to be able to thank you for coming, thank you for your feedback, we appreciate it. Nothing binding, but just we acknowledge. I know we have our statement, and maybe that's just what the leadership of the board does, and that's fine. You guys do a good job of it. But sometimes I feel like it'd be really nice to. We don't get a lot of visitors, unfortunately, and it'd be nice to encourage those to come back. We appreciate
a
it.
lot watching.
Not now.
There was more
Go back.
online watching
Go
than,
back
I was
to-
surprised.
April 2020.
Yeah, that's true. I'm the novice.
Do you have any suggestions, Alan, like a concept? I don't put you on the spot.
It can be a very generic, I'll have to think about it, but, other than appreciation, acknowledgement for their participation or something. I'm not saying that we should engage or necessarily outline that we're engaging with them. I agree that it needs to be limited because we need to hear their feedback, ponder upon it, act upon it if necessary, make sure that things are acted upon. But I think some people, when they have come up, it's a lot to be up and speak in front of a large group and make their case for whatever it may be or state their opinion. And I think it's just nice to acknowledge them as best as we can. And we do a pretty good job of it. But I think it'd be nice if I felt so inclined to say, thank you for your time, I really appreciate it.
Could we put in a suffix to the first sentence that says, accept gratitude? Could you say, like, for example, because the line you're calling into question is Board members should listen and refer, I'm sorry, no, it's, what is it? It's,
Board will-
board will refrain from responding to the public during the public comment section of the agenda with exception to gratitude. Or maybe we say, other than gratitude, I don't, does that leave, that's all of it?
My feeling would be that it should be the board president's role to
That's
do
fine.
that, just to avoid, I completely agree, and I feel like we've done a good job, but maybe
I'm not
I
necessarily.
misremembering of just saying, thank you for your comment, we'll take that into consideration. And of course, it says here that the superintendent should take a list of all those people and reach out to them and address anything. I would just want to avoid the situation where 3 people don't get a comment and then the other 4 board members feel compelled. Like, it should just be a consistent procedure that this designated person at the end of each comment
So should we put it in the procedure then? Because I'm content with that being in procedure.
But we did write that section specifically to allow for indirect response to those comments if it's agenda related, right? So it says we won't respond during public comment section to non-agenda public, or we won't respond to non-agenda public comments. But if they make a comment and it's about a section of the agenda we're about to get to, then during that section of the agenda, I'm not saying, I don't think it would be appropriate to call them up at that point, but you can say a question was raised during public comment. I would like to address that now since it's related to this agenda item, right? I think that was the intent of writing it that way.
We can add like to, or a section of the communication between board members and the public.
Beth, you had something too?
I just wanted to say that when people have come up, Michael has, excuse me, Michael has said thank you for coming up, and you have thanked them. So I know
Well,
every
thank you,
time
Beth.
since you've been president, you have. So I will say that. And we do have a lot of people that watch online. I figured there probably was, but then Steve sent out those numbers, so. I know at my church started streaming since the pandemic, and they always acknowledge the people that are watching online, so. I don't know if that would be appropriate too, but.
No, I'm okay, I think, I agree, Mike's done a good job, I'm fine delegating to the
Ellen,
president.
how could you say it now? So
Alan's a really nice guy.
Is there opportunity in this document to make some meeting decorum formalities, like laying out expected? Like, do you think that could be I'm just trying to think of like a avenue for what you're describing.
I'm not sure, well, this is the first reading, so we
Yeah,
can just talk about
yeah,
it.
let's stew on it. And
Well, we did discuss potentially coming up with more of a meeting specific procedural protocol,
Yeah.
how-to that would kind of lay out all those Robert's Rules things that you don't want to have to memorize, and you're thinking in the middle of the meeting, gosh, how do I adjust an agenda? Like, just coming up with a quick one-pager and that sort of public comment
could be a
section that could
part
be a
on-
part on that.
yeah, that could be an opportunity.
Yeah, Robert's Rules for Dummies.
Okay, so
I will
yes.
say as the newest member, and we went through this during orientation, not with this document, but this is very helpful, and I think it would be very helpful for any future board member to kind of get the lay of the land and a quick, here's how a meeting is conducted, and here's how I'm supposed to respond in many different scenarios. I think you've all done a really good job doing this thing.
So like a meeting procedure type.
Yeah, one other one, maybe so communication between board members and the public. Specifically, if a public member calls a board member, or emails them, how do they respond to it? I see we have, if there's a concern, it would be referred to the appropriate staff and the superintendent would be alerted. But is that just the only thing board members are supposed to do is take an email from the public and forward it to the superintendent? Are there any responses that are allowed? I think sort of clarifying that like we did with the board members and superintendent and between board members, right?
Well, I mean, like, you can't take the literal sense of this question, because it says board members should listen and refer parent and or community concerns to the appropriate staff members and alert the superintendent of the concern. I think the forwarding to the superintendent satisfies the alert, the superintendent
Sure.
concern. Should listen, I think, implies dialogue, like, you're not gonna just,
I guess, I mean, more
And
if
then,
a
like,
community member says, for instance, you know, I have a real problem with my student's teacher. Should the board member give their opinion on that scenario? They should not.
No, yeah,
So
right.
I think clarifying that would be helpful.
Okay.
What to do in those scenarios when you shouldn't give your opinion, but you could acknowledge, you know, I'm in receipt of that, I'm sorry to hear it, but that's about the extent of board communication with specific
So
community members with
avoiding
issues.
an individual, avoiding an individual opinion on a situation, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful for new board members to know, because I just sort of assumed, but that was never really told. And, but I haven't had a ton of those instances anyhow, but.
You guys think? Avoid individual opinion?
Or is that so rare it's not even worth dealing with?
I guess for me, it's clear, but that's where I want to understand better, and maybe you can just refer it offline to provide some feedback. You know, in all the training that I was exposed to, bullet 2 under the norms, we will share individual, staff, parent, and community concerns through the appropriate channels, respecting confidentiality as well as legal responsibilities, as well as that bullet you were just talking to. For me, are clear that if there's a concern and it's related to personnel or anything else, that there's an appropriate channel, and that channel is, you know, next supervisor up. So if it's a parent-teacher issue, then it's a principal notification. If it's an issue with the principal's district leadership, then it goes to superintendent, et cetera. You know, if there's a hierarchy chart we need to put together to make that more clear, I'm trying to avoid getting in a situation of having like 15 bullet points of, if this happens, you need to contact this person. But again, I'm open to.
That's not really what I meant. It's more having something in there that explains board member opinions or discussion related to a personnel issue or I don't know, a food service issue or whatever issue a community member brings. How does the board respond to those concerns?
I think maybe there's an answer in the question that is an explanation of your role as a board member to that party. Because like I can speak from experience when I've spoken to people in the public and they'll say X, Y, or Z concern or problem. The first place that I start is, this is like my role, and this is the domicile. Like I can only make decisions in a duly convened meeting in the public. Like, and here the district only has, or the board only has one employee. Like, and so then when they understand the limitations that you have, I think that makes it a lot more clear what they can expect of you. So I think in terms of just like advice to the protocol, my advice would be a definition of your role as a board member. Now, do we want to, again, now is that A, advice that we want to endorse in protocols? And B, do we want to spell that out? Or do we want to leave it to the orientation? That's for you guys to decide. So.
Yeah, I think it's an awfully wide gray area there, because you, in your role as a board member, are the representative for the public. So I'd hate to recommend that your response is as short as possible, and just, I will refer that to the appropriate channel, thank you, bye.
Sure.
That's not doing them any justice either. But there are certainly specific instances where you're probably creating legal liabilities for yourself if you're discussing your opinion on specific staff, et cetera. And I don't know the ins and outs of that well enough, but.
Perhaps we could just say, don't promise things to people. You know, if they have a problem, that you can obviously talk to them and commiserate with them, but then say, well, we need to go, obviously if they're having a problem with the teacher, we need to talk to, the person needs to be talking to the teacher, and then possibly the principal needs to get brought in, or whatever needs to happen. I don't think it has to be that cut and dry, but they do need to know that we can't solve the problem.
It makes sense, but it's more, when it happens to me more regularly, a community member comes to a friend and is like, I saw this in the paper, what do you think about it? You know, is it best practice to give my opinion?
I would.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's not the opinion of the board, or.
I would
something
clarify
hasn't
that. I mean,
been-
I put in my email signature, you know, my opinion isn't the opinion of the board. just to add that.
Which is inherent, I
Right.
think, the
Okay.
social media part.
Right, you're entitled to your own
You can
opinions
speak
still.
and do things, you'd be
I think we
cognizant
still
not
have
to.
the First Amendment.
So I guess I thought it was best practice not to do that, though.
Best practice maybe not to commit yourself to something. or to
Right.
No,
promise
not
it
even,
with-
if my opinion differs, just to say, I'm not gonna discuss that.
I think that coming.
But maybe that's not the case, and we don't need to.
Were you gonna quote coming to order?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, let's go.
I'm pretty sure there's a, from my, the homework Michael gave me when I first got on reading that book, there's a section that really outlines that. I couldn't recite it verbatim. I'm not sure we want to put it into the handbook or the norms, but that's a really good reference. To answer that question, maybe something from a onboarding perspective.
All right, okay. So I think this is a lot of really good feedback for, Eric, if you and I want to collaborate again on the what happens if the will doesn't get met, and maybe meeting mechanics like Alan was talking about, and then zooming in on, Alex, your comment regarding parent concerns.
Adding that to the handbook sounded like it. Taking that and putting it in is what I was getting to, but I just forgot the place I saw that. But
Okay,
that's what I'm
referencing-
referring to.
Yeah, that, I
If
think
you wanna
that
put
sounds
that
like,
in the norms, if you think that's.
so we
a
can
good
put our
option.
heads together for a second
Yeah.
reading, and then bring that back, you guys take a peek at it. Does that sound? Okay. Not to, I just want to keep us
Yeah.
out of here before 9, so. All right, anything else on the approval of the Board of Education norms first reading? Okay, I'm not gonna post a motion on it, I think we have consensus, so. All right, so then, the next item on the agenda is executive session. All right, let's see here. Is there a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters related to employment, discipline, and let's see what else we got. Discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, as well as compensation, appointments, and other matters?
So moved?
Second.
And seconded, roll call?
Kratos,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Sampson,
Yes.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
DeVito,
Yes?
motion carries.
Thanks.